Kitfelchi Road, Izedo Biha. Welcome to the Village Oak Tree for February 7th, 2024. My name's Terrence O'Donnell, and I'm back again to your village this week with something that might make you think a little bit. So this week, I bring you an interview with a young man who hosts a podcast with a crew called the Scuttlebutt. I'll let him tell you what the term means. My mission today is to bring all of you a perspective of what's going on in the country and around the world from the viewpoint of the younger generation. So if you're a first-time viewer or listener, I've created a short advertisement for my podcast website for you to listen to now before we get into the interview. I want to take this time to ask for a donation of any amount to help me keep this podcast going, and to also explain how to find my website and what's inside when you arrive at the door. My podcast will remain free to subscribe to for the time being on all of the major mobile podcast apps, on my YouTube channel, Krana Biha, and for the first month on my Substack page, Krana Biha. I've set up a donation link on the Village Oak Tree webpage at rss.com and a donations page on my website at www.kranabiha.com. If you care to contribute, I use PayPal for your security. Think of it as me passing my hat around at the end of my visit each week. If you like this podcast, please share it with everyone you know before it gets too late. My motive is not to profit off the news I bring you, but to make all of you more aware of what's going on around you, and I can't do it without your help. Now, to explain how to find my website. If you're watching this video on YouTube, the address is right on the screen behind me. If you're listening to an audio show, just type in www.crann-na-beatha.com in your browser and search for it. The website domain name is Gaelic. It may be a little hard to find unless you know what you're looking for. Then bookmark it if you wish to return again. I also have the RSS feeder enabled, so if you like my free blog posts, you can be notified whenever I post something new. Search for www.kranabiha.com in your RSS feeder and set it up. Users finding a website for the first time will reach the welcome page to learn a little bit about what's inside. There you see a homepage link at the bottom of the page. On the homepage, you can learn a little more about what Krana Biha means for a little bit of Irish culture and a little more about me in general. On the menu bar at the top, there are links to all the pages in the website. The blog section is where I post podcast newsletters, blog articles, and stories and poems. There is a drop-down podcast menu with links to both podcasts, a donations page, a bookstore tab to purchase my published books, and a contact page in case someone cares to leave a message. Thank you for your patronage and support. So let's get into today's topic. Felci, everyone, and I want to introduce my guest, Hermes Auslander, a young American that's kindly agreed to let me ask him some pointed questions about the state of things from his perspective and background. So if you would please, kind sir, I emailed some questions sort of, and I've got some laid out here that are all pretty much everything I emailed you ahead of time. So, the first thing I kind of want to do is get an idea of who you are, where your background is, and not anything specific, but I want to know your podcast. It's called The Scuttlebutt. So tell me a little bit about that. The thing is, being former active duty myself, I know what the term scuttlebutt means, but most non-military people probably have no idea. So kind of explain that a little bit and tell us a little bit about your podcast. And, I did listen to it a little bit today, just to kind of get an idea. But, let us know about it.
Sure. No, I appreciate that, Terrence. Yeah, I mean, like you said, the two of us being military service, or anybody who is has some military service, probably recognizes the term scuttlebutt as that old gossip, that old watering hole. I mean, but civilians have it too. They have the like the corporate watering hole, if you will. You sit by the 5-gallon on a break or something, and you just discuss, whether it's sports or your family or whatever. It's just, what's the latest and greatest in everybody's life. And so in the military, you have plenty of watches, you have plenty of duties, you have plenty of assignments where it's a lot of sitting around, right? There's a lot of that. And what else are you going to do when you're stuck with one or two other people for the next 24 hours other than, make some conversation. So that's kind of what the Scuttlebutt podcast is all about, is just making some conversation amongst the lower enlisted, maybe the higher enlisted, and whoever else is brave enough to come on the show and maybe knock a couple cold ones back, maybe loosen those lips a little bit, and maybe discuss some things that are a little more taboo, but maybe shouldn't be, whatever it may be. I started the podcast actually when former Commander in Chief Trump was in his first indictment, and we were just we were just very, I was curious what other, what my fellow sailors and soldiers were, discussing or what they were thinking, regards to Commander in Chief, and then that's kind of where it took off. We were just, I just said, what if we did this with some microphones, and what if we shared this with, the rest of the population, what rest of the world, see what everybody else thinks, and it sort of gradually, slowly built up from there into what it is today, which is, just some friends hanging out, some guests that we invite on, and any topic under the sun that we can discuss, whatever interests us.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that because I reviewed your last episode with the comic book creator, and I thought, that's a little offbeat, but I guess that's what you guys are all about, doing offbeat topics.
Exactly.
I'm kind of like that too in that regard. I tend to go after offbeat news, things that normally people would pass by in the news feeds, because I stay away from the Donald Trump stuff because he's front and center everywhere, and everything that he does, everybody knows about it right then and now. I mean, he's the biggest media topic. But as far as it goes, and that's kind of what we're kind of doing today, because I'm an old guy. I admit it. I'm a senior citizen, and I was in basic training when Nixon resigned, just to kind of give you an idea of where my life has been. And so I'm a little behind as far as some things. My perspective, I guess, is a little bit behind. So I wanted a younger person's perspective on the same things that I talk about. Okay. So how about this? My next question was, yourself, you are where you are. What about your crew? I mean, your podcast crew. I noticed you in the podcast, you were talking to somebody named Morpheus and, one of the other sidekicks. I mean, they sound like you're in your age group. But the other part of it is, do they have the same employer you do?
Well, yeah, Morpheus and myself, we actually met on a tour overseas, actually, and that's when that's how we became friends. And so we like to say Theron is our token civilian. He keeps us grounded. He keeps us with he keeps us in check so that we don't get too far out into deep water when it comes to terminology or acronyms or something. So 2/3 of the podcast, the tripod that makes up the Scuttlebutt podcast, is active duty military, and then Theron is, like I said, our token or our resident civilian who makes up the tripod.
Well, that's a pretty good deal. Yeah, you kind of need that. I know I have to be curbed quite a bit sometimes, especially by getting people asking me, wanting me to tell stories, and I end up going down the sometimes a place I shouldn't be.
Right.
I think all of us who've got military background tend to do that without thinking about it.
It's just dark humor. That's all. It's just making us laugh. That's all.
Well, yeah, what we think is funny may not be so funny with somebody who has no idea. I've learned that the hard way.
Likewise.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the world. So part of it, I wanted to ask about your thoughts on the chaos all the politicians are making out of the borders around the world. And I'm not talking about just the United States, because, American media news, it's all about the southern border. They don't talk about the northern border very much. Now, the Canadians are all about the northern border. I read a lot of news stories out of CBC, and they're talking about it all the time. But the Americans, it's like, not so much. It's all about the South. But on the other hand, you go listen to or read news articles from Euronews, The Guardian, BBC, and all that. They're all about what's going on with all the migration, all the migrants moving around over there now. So, you said earlier in our first conversation that you had been outside the United States. So, I mean, what did you run into over there as far as the rest of the world? Well, what do they think's going on with all these more migrations?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one, and especially tricky in today's climate of what is, I would say, culturally acceptable, but it's a mixed bag, I guess, is the easiest way I could say it, right? And that
Mhm.
is, I think border integrity, right, for national identity is is something most people agree is, at least semi important in terms of like how we define ourselves, or how we, what can we say is Europe, or what can we say is the United States, or more specifically, what could we say is the state of Texas, or what could we
Right.
say is the country of Germany, like how. And I think most of us sort of take for granted that that the way we define that is through borders. Now, then the question why I say culturally maybe a hot button topic, as you alluded to, is there is this idea of, well, especially with the globally connected world that we have today, maybe there's some open border policy that would be more preferable, or maybe there doesn't need to be so much, emphasis put on, border, like, patrol or security, or prevention for, humanitarian efforts. And that's one thing that I saw when I was over in Europe specifically, because it was during the whole. I mean, it's still ongoing, of course, and there's always
Mhm.
another crisis that is the topic of discussion. But it was the initial migrant crisis during the whole Syrian refugee crisis when I was over there,
Mhm.
and it was like I said, it was a mixed bag. You hear one side of the aisle, I would say, if that's what we want to call it. Uh, you hear one side claiming, well, this is imperative for human life. This is imperative for the humanitarian crisis, and is it that difficult to basically have a heart? And I think that's a good argument, of course. Like our fellow man, we should. I'm the type of person that will take my shirt off and help my neighbor, and it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, kind of a thing. If you're in need of help, I would like to help you if I can,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
um but at the same time, the conversation always evolves into, but nefarious actors and advantageous ne'er do wells, or it also evolves into experience. And one thing that I'd say much of the conversation or argument for, let's say, even passive borders, not even open borders, but just passivity, or maybe the taking back of some of the like border security measures, is usually from a place of inexperience, where you don't have any experience with various cultures or backgrounds. You're not aware of conflicts, natural conflicts, cultural conflicts that arise from a lot of these things. And I think it was there was a book I read when I was over there that was recommended to me from one of my superiors, called Prey by I don't want to butcher her name, but Ayan, I think, Hirsi Ayan Hirsi Ali, I think, is her name. And
Mhm.
she is a Muslim migrant to, I want to say, Germany, and she became, she studied psychology and wrote a series of books, but specifically around like cultural conflicts was the one that Prey was about. And it highlights taking a blind eye to issues, but if you take a blind eye rather to issues in these cultural conflicts, then it only breeds a better environment for these issues to continue arising. And she gets a lot of criticism for, it's like, oh, well, you must be like, like racist, or you must be, this, that, the other, like bigoted against a certain cultural group or something. And and the criticism again is always like, well, I'm not doing anything but stating data. Like, I'm looking at what the numbers are, and if you look at the numbers and then I tie a couple of correlating factors in here, I don't see how that is like discriminatory. And that's one thing that Europe certainly has started to deal with. And I think, to your point of between Canada border and southern border for the state, as far as the states are concerned, is the perception, right? The propaganda perception, and the conflict of culture, right? I think a big portion of the southern border issue is that one side of the aisle is claiming something for one reason, maybe because of a lack of experience, but probably, have their own agenda. And then the opposite side is probably also true, probably because a lack of experience with the culture in question, or, whether it's South Americans or Hondurans coming up north for, again, humanitarian efforts, and then nefarious actors, hijacking said migration. I mean, there's a lot of those factors, and the lack of experience with any of these migrations, I think, is what drives this conversation, and the ignorance of it is what drives the conversation as we continue on. I mean, my thought is that it's such a mixed bag that I think some of this is inherent. Again, like, how do we define ourselves? The border probably is one way that we should, and is taken for granted for part of that definition. But then how do we actually implement these things? How do we are we going to turn a blind eye to humanitarian efforts, or are we not? And again, like, as someone who would prefer to push that up the chain of command and not have to answer it myself, I'd say my experience is that is hopefully just education, is just to, like, further educate myself on each individual, situation. If it's a European situation, because I'm not currently living there, I would say it's lower on the totem pole for me. Whereas the States, as I'm currently in the States, it might be a higher, position for me. And then how can I educate myself on what's actually going on? Whether it's boots on the ground, whether it's, reading X, Y, and Z about it, or firsthand experience about it. That's an issue that I think a lot of Americans are just dealing with right now.
No, I agree. I mean, like you, I spent a lot of time overseas, and I've been to places where they had really hard borders. I'll give you an example: Tajikistan. If you go to the northern border of Afghanistan, there's a river there. Just across the river is Tajikistan, and they have a very, very hard border there. And knowing their policies, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so is this what the Americans envision for themselves at their southern border? Well, they kind of sort of do, because Texas is throwing all that concertina wire out there and the buoys and everything else. So I'm like, okay, and a lot of it is fear mongering. And, that's the other part of what I read in the news, is that there's a lot of fear mongering from one side, and it's not true, a lot of it. And yes, there are a lot of traffickers who are making a lot of money bringing these people up through the Darien Gap and up through and trying to get them across the border in the United States. But they're only in it for monetary reasons. They could care less what happens to you once they let you go. And that's their bottom line. As far as the refugees are concerned, one of the things that I learned, and it wasn't here in the United States that I learned this overseas, going to refugee camps and everything else. They have limited access to social media and news and anything else. So a lot of what they know is passed on from mouth to mouth. So some guy comes into their refugee camp or comes to their village or whatever and starts telling them all about this stuff, saying he can do this, he can do that, and you can have a better life here, and so on and so forth. And they lap it up, because anything's better than where they are right now. So there they go. And they don't get told about all the bad things on the trip up until they get there. And unfortunately, a lot of bad things happen. I mean, look at Libya and all the people there that, been killed, and everything else happened. And, last week I had a story I pulled off the news from Médecins Sans Frontières, which, in English is Doctors Without Borders. And I've met people from there, in my travels, and they're somewhat political, but that's another story. But the big thing is that they're reporting on all of these atrocities going on, and nobody really doing much about it. So the question is, these people who are, largely uneducated in a lot of ways, and some are educated but just don't know any better. Like, there's a lot of Chinese immigrants coming in through Ecuador and then coming up, through the jungles and up through Mexico, and all of these, whether they're from Haiti, China, India, what have you, are all being told the same thing: come here, we'll get you across the border, and we'll set you up, we'll do this, we'll do that, and all that. And they believe it. and a lot of bad things are happening to them. So that's my big thing is, if you could fix that, if you could just fix that one big thing right there, then it would really help a lot. And there's a lot of people who are more than willing to wait a little bit down on the southern border and come through immigration like they're supposed to. They really, they don't have a problem with that. But the United States right now has a very dysfunctional system. The courts are a mess. They don't have enough judges, and the border patrol is running around like almost like a Gestapo in a lot of ways. So it's a mess. And the worst part is, because of the factionalism going on, everything I'm reading about is that it's almost like it's designed. You got one group that wants to keep everybody out, another group that's wanting to take care of them, but their hands are handcuffed behind their back. And, I don't know how that's going to get resolved, because, that leads into my other part here. I read a lot of stories from Europe. They don't seem to have nowhere near the problem. Now, granted, they have a migrant problem. And yes, over in the Balkans and over in that area, there are migrants that are dying out on the trails because they have shut down a lot of the borders and stuff, because there's too many people coming across there, don't have any papers. But at the same time, it's nowhere near what's going on here in the American continents. But at the same time, you got Great Britain. Well, all of their issues. They let in way too many people that they can handle. And, Canada is going through the same thing right now. They opened up their immigration system about 5 or 6 years ago, and now they got more people than they can handle, and they're grumbling up there about how to take care of them. So again, it's all about government control. If you did it right, it works great. But if you don't do it right, well, then you get the mess that we have everywhere. Mm-hmm. And now we got nationalist people, like Serbia right now just elected a nationalist politician over there to take charge of the country, and he's all about closing down his borders. He's listening to Orban a lot right now, and they're going to be stirring up trouble over there. But again, this whole thing is worldwide because of all the people coming out, like you said, Syria, coming out of sub-Saharan Africa and everywhere else, and it's they got nowhere else to go. They're being killed where they are, so they got to go somewhere. Yeah. And they're being told bad stuff about where to go.
Yeah. And that's, I empathize as well with situations like that, that it's just, it's if the US, went to shit and we had a war and, had people dying in the streets. And Canada said, hey, this is a better life up here. You better believe that, like you said, anywhere is better than here. So let's go, kind of a thing. If that was the case, a lot of us would take that opportunity, regardless of how hard it was, because like you said, we're in a rock and a hard place. So there's certainly empathy there for these situations. But at the same time, like you said, it's almost, is it manufactured? Is the crisis in itself? I'd say part of it, yes. We can talk on, days and days for how we all contribute to a lot of these issues and a lot of these crises, ourselves, both as consumers, and then of course as who we elect as leaders. But then to your point, how you're going to basically, a nationalist will get elected because you have this ebb and flow of if you have your hands tied, but you're trying to do what you think is right, and you mess it up, you foul up in the process of doing it, and now you have this mess like we have at our border. That only leads people to one direction. It's like, well, if you're not doing the job, let's elect somebody else in the opposite direction to maybe fix it. Even if they disagree or don't, or maybe unaware, let's be frank. A lot of, especially Americans, are unaware of what each politician's policies are, where they, where they lean. And so, I feel like it's just this natural ebb and flow. If this person's not doing the job, well, let's try this person next time. Well, they really messed it up the other way and they closed down the border. Now we have this humanitarian crisis. Let's go back the other way, and maybe opening the border would be better, So it is a mess. I don't know how I would fix it personally.
So that kind of leads me into the next part of what I wanted to ask you about, because I'm asking these questions because you're a lot younger than I am. And you talk to people your age and your age group. I would say, in 5 years north of your age, maybe a few years south. So you talk to more people in that regard. So my question is, you know, what do you guys in your age group think about all these, all of these politicians? What I'm concerned with here, and I say this a lot because only what I see overseas is the chaos that we got going on right now. Now, we have a background of chaos. Donald Trump got elected in 2016 amongst a bunch of chaos. And then 2020 and January of 2021 was even more chaos. And we haven't recovered from all of that. So big thing is we're going up into November. He's making a lot of noise about what he wants to do starting day one if he gets reelected. So, I mean, from your military background and your age demographic, if you will, I mean, what do you folks think about that?
Hmm. Um, so I mean, I have a lot of feelings on. I'd say it's easier for me to answer the question on what do I think of politicians and what I've heard my demographic. But I would say my position in the military is a unique one where I would say I interact with quite a few higher ups,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to generals, admirals, etc. And you know, it, when I would say I would categorize a lot of people that I talk to into one of two categories. One category is the politician type, those that are kissing babies, they're writing checks, they're signing autographs, and anytime that anytime I encounter them and we interact, it's a superficial um, exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say outside of those superficial exchanges, I wouldn't have much more to say on what their opinions might be, might not be, where they might sway. I don't know. I don't have the biggest amount of trust in those conversations, those interactions, though. I will say that. On the other
Yeah.
side, though, most people that I do interact with, regardless of age, yes, a majority I would say are between. I mean, I do have plenty of lower enlisted, so I'd say from 18 to 40, at least 45. I have
Mm-hmm.
a pretty good age range there. A majority of them are somewhere between 20 and 35, let's say. And of those, we all pretty much agree on the political climate of at least the states, but I think it is global. I mean, like I said, I met one of my co-hosts when I was overseas, and when we were overseas, um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
everybody, both local and in the military, while we were over there, all were pretty much on the same page as well there with, things that were happening in that country, and whether it was I mean, because it was COVID actually during that time frame, and there was plenty of locals at that time frame that were screaming against the political climate. And this is all to say that none of us trust the politicians or the political climate right now. None of us feel represented by the political class. None of us feel that we can trust the political class. None of us feel that there is a road out of this, if that makes sense. I mean, I think if there's a way to summarize the sentiment that I've gathered thus far from all of my peers, it's one of hopelessness and frustration. It's no, our interests are not represented, and there's no way to get them represented. There's no way to get money out of politics. Somebody will say this or that will help, but it doesn't. And there's just a complete breakdown, lack of faith when it comes to the institutions of this country, whether it's the education, whether it's the political institutions, whether it's the uh, police enforcement, whether it's the yeah, whether security institution, whether it's the media. I think there is a complete breakdown in the states of faith in all of these institutions. And as one of those people that believes that there has been a breakdown, and I have absolutely no faith in any of the institutions I listed off, I think I think it's rightfully so. I think the media's displayed time and time again its inconsistencies and its ability to completely lie and be a puppet for propaganda. We've seen nothing but a downfall of education in even my lifetime, and
Mm-hmm.
I come from a big family between my siblings, my parents, myself, just a complete downward slide. Um, and as someone who enjoys learning and education as a whole, it's very clear and obvious. It's important to see, and to see the breakdown of, and mix those together and see the breakdown of our security, the security of our state, when it comes to education of police officers, and the military. the Navy is lowering standards to let more people in. That's not helping us create a strong Navy. If anything, it's intentionally weakening the Navy. Let's lower the standards so that less and less people are actually capable of doing the job of the military. Let's lower the standards for the Army. Let's lower, and the police. This has been the classic joke, I guess, of the police officers in the U.S. as well for the longest time. They eat donuts, they drink coffee, and they don't know how to shoot. It's a sad state of affairs, I guess. So yeah, I don't think that's even my immediate age group. I would say it's seeming to become universal, especially in the States. I think,
Right.
even boomer parents, if you will, which my parents are have been, my father's similar mentality to myself, and has been swayed more and more, especially over recent times, that the American dream isn't what it was. Even as he is someone who would classically be considered one that achieved the American dream, it's disheartening to see in later years that it has eroded to the extent that it has.
Yeah, I kind of concur with that. I don't know. I'm not even sure what the American dream was, to be honest with you. I spent, a good portion. I added it all up once. I spent probably over 4 years total. That, if I put everything together, overseas doing bad things in bad places, it's like, okay. So I'm not really the one to ask about what the American dream was. I was more worried about just surviving one day to the next. But the other part of that is, so just out of curiosity, have you ever heard of this Project 2025?
Project 2025. Nothing's ringing a bell now.
Good. Stay that way. It's starting to be a really big deal with this Heritage Foundation. I've seen it in the news quite a bit leading up here because they're wanting to put Donald Trump in the hot seat and let him do his thing, and they're going to run everything after that. But that's a good thing. I know all about it, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good thing either. So just out of curiosity, especially with your background, so are you and all your cohorts worried about Donald Trump being commander in chief again?
No, I would say no. Mostly because, I'd say since Bush Jr., maybe, Clinton, even, I would say that again, this machine that is the military isn't taking orders from commander in chief. I know on paper that's what we're told, and I know in the news or at his latest press conference he'll claim, and the amount of weight is certainly more than what we hold or what the average U.S. citizen holds. But at the end of the day, especially seeing what I've seen and having Trump commander in chief prior is he could care less. He actually boarded one of he boarded a ship. Obviously, he did his rounds, shaking hands, kissing babies, kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And every impression that I and anybody who's met him has is, he's not he's not he's not here to be a leader, and he's certainly not here to command. He's here to make his name and build his
Right.
team up. And it's a shame because I know that there are plenty of people who I respect and plenty of family members that I love that have been sold, especially because of the breakdown and erosion of institutions, up to this point, specifically in the political sphere, that they're ready and we're ready to accept anything that was different than what we had, with Bush Jr. and Clinton and then Obama. Anybody and everybody was just ready for something different. And when I lost that faith when Obama was elected, and I was like, maybe there is this one, maybe his slogan of change is going to be the one, right? Like, let's
Right.
see. And that was the last time I ever had an ounce, even a sliver of minute faith
Right.
or hope. And so I
Yeah, I
fully
lost mine. I lost mine when Bush Jr. took the reins, and all of a sudden everything just went upside down.
yeah.
But that was a whole nother thing. And yeah, I agree with you about Obama. He said a lot of good things, but when it came to doing things, yeah, not so much. It's like he tucked his tail between his legs and sat in a corner somewhere.
As did
Um,
Trump. you know?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Trump was a whole nother animal. I mean, I wasn't on active duty back then, but still, you keep your head in the game. I don't care, if you've done something long enough, like anything else. Even after all these years, I still keep my head in the game. So I hear things, I see things. I still know some people, and it's like okay, this big thing about Donald Trump telling everybody, that he's going to be dictator for a day, right after he gets inaugurated, and everybody's like, "What? You're going to do what?"
Yeah.
Um, he wants to impose martial law if people protest against his presidency and all kinds of stuff like that. It's like, all right, so are we going to have anybody in Washington that's going to say no, you can't do that, like Milley was doing? You know, that's the question, because that goes back to that Project 2025. Because if Trump gets elected, these guys are saying, well, we're going to implement this as soon as he takes his hand off the Bible, and it's going to be a game changer, and that would eliminate pretty much any kind of um, military counseling at that point. So I don't know,
Hmm.
and that's interesting.
I'm gonna
Uh,
do some research then. I'm curious with this Project 2025, and I mean, I'm a big fan of history, and I've been going through World War II a lot recently.
mhm.
Back, when I was in high school, and then when I was in university, I had a big fascination. Maybe my name gives it away with with ancient Greece and the Romans
Right,
and everything, right? And now revisiting and rehashing a lot of World War II. It's just I come to that question of, there were so many instances of this, and I know it's hindsight's 2020, but there were so many instances of this that even those on the ground at the time, were vocal about, and yet somehow we still ended up where we ended up, right? And
right,
it's just it's fascinating, but it's always scary when you see a lot of these um I don't know what you call them, maybe, like highlights today, or like little pieces that are
mhm,
highlighted today that, kind of ring a little too familiar. May I recognize that song a little too much,
right.
recognize the mentality a little too much. And,
Well,
yeah, I'll do some research on this Project 2025.
well, the big thing about it is, you step back from just that in itself, but you step back a little bit and look at things that Donald Trump is saying to everybody at his rallies. And, you got these think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and a few other ones that are piling on with all of this stuff. And you lump that all into one large thing, okay? And you step back and you take a look at what was going on in Germany in the late 1920s and the whole decade of the 1930s, and you kind of compare what they look like back then compared to what these people want to bring in 2025. And there's a lot of parallels right there, and it's a little scary. So the other part of the equation, like right now, is Joe Biden obviously is having problems with not stepping on his feet, and his credibility has been a little off here lately with this whole business with Israel and Gaza, and then now this thing with the special counsel report and all that stuff. So the big question is, my number one question for all of this is, why is the American public, and it doesn't really matter whether you're Republican, Democrat, or somewhere in between, why are we being funneled down to where we only got these two guys to vote on?
Mm, mm. I've been asking that since I could ask questions. Um,
Uh-huh.
and it's and again, going through, I've been I'm almost done with my second reading, because it's a big one, and so it takes a couple to get through it all. Is John Tollan's biography on Adolf Hitler. Goes
Ah,
his entire life, his childhood, his rise to power, etc. And one thing that I've noticed, again, to your point of parallels, is if the question is why, why do the population accept, I think it's just like anything else, is we want an answer. We want to trust. If you trust that you get into your car, you start it up, that it's going to drive and it's going to get you from point A to point B. But you don't know how to, you know, you don't know how to change a tire, or you don't know how to check your battery or anything, or, you know, anything else. Um, that's a pretty precarious situation that most people put themselves in every single
Sure.
day, but we kind of just trust it. And because we kind of just trust it, everything kind of keeps running and it keeps working. And most people get to where they're going pretty okay. And I think that habit is what we've, you know, used or extended to our government, our, you know, our leaderships, our teachers, you know, our police officers. I think we're all
Mhm.
just like, well, because I'm not a police officer, or I'm not in the military, or I'm not a politician, you know, I don't know how it all works. And therefore I kind of just trust that it all works. I trust that it's going to be okay. I trust the IRS is, you know, taxing us correctly. And I trust that our tax money is going to the places that I hope and want it to go. But we're so disconnected that I don't think any of us really, you know any of
You're
the.
right. You're right. And that's the biggest thing that's going on, and it's been going on for a long time now, is that the American public, for the most part, they've been on autopilot for decades. And now all of a sudden things are starting to kind of, you know, the engines are starting to knock a little bit. Car doors are getting a little squeaky, and people are starting to pay a little bit of attention. But like you said, they don't really know what to pay attention to,
Yeah,
and that's unfortunate.
yeah, unfortunate for sure. Yeah.
Huh. So I'm pretty much, that was all I really wanted to talk about here for as today's show goes. And it was good to have your opinions on these things. Like I said, this podcast generally is a solo deal on my end. I pick out an op-ed and I, discuss it with references. But I had a friend who told me, hey, you're kind of, in some ways, you're kind of one-sided. And I thought to myself, okay, I get that, but it's really hard sometimes for me to get somebody to say, hey, this is how I think of things. And this is how without being overly over the top. And that was my concern, because the last thing I want to do is get into a discussion with some fanatic, and end up with down a rabbit hole someplace that I can't control. It's like, no, 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 no. And
Yeah.
I've met people like that, and then it's never pretty.
Yeah. And of course, do everything we can to not be that in ourselves, right?
Oh
That's the,
yeah, yeah,
you know, like you said, you know, if it's one side, it's like, well, how do we balance that, you know? So
right.
it's always good. It's always good to step outside of it. And, you know, I appreciate you letting me come on and, you know, give
Hmm.
my absolutely zero 2 cents that is worth zero.
Believe it or not, it's worth a lot more than you think.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
All right, then. I'll appreciate it. I'm gonna let you go, and I'm gonna close up shop here. Okay. This is the Chinese New Year, so my better half is waiting anxiously for me to get all my stuff done, because we have a Lunar New Year party to go to tonight.
Oh, that sounds lovely. That's why you're looking as sharp as you are. Well, I hope you have fun and
Yep.
happy New Year.
All right. Well, take care now.
You as well, Terrence. Thanks for having me.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed it, and you'll return again for another episode of the Village Oak Tree. Please share this podcast with your friends and relations. The more you share, the more we can convince enough people to make the world a better place to live in. This is Shauna K. I hope you'll continue to let me travel to your village to bring you some news from the world outside that might make you think a little after we part for the day. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this Irish blessing as you go about your day. May the saddest day of your future be no worse than the happiest day of your past. Slán go foil, which means goodbye for now in Irish.